Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love.
Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm political scientist Michael Baranowski, an emeritus professor at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by University of Northern Iowa political scientist Justin Holmes and political scientist Michael Levy. Hey, guys.
Hey, good to see you guys again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to all of the things that we weren't able to get to on the weekend show.
I don't know, Mike. Can we get to all of the things? Because we didn't cover all the things we wanted even within those topics.
Well, there's that.
Define
yes,
all.
There's that as well. There's so much I wanted to say because I'd been off for the last couple of weeks, because of the tree branch coming down through my roof and into our bedroom. That was a lot of fun. So hopefully at some point we will not be looking up and seeing the stars quite so directly, but we'll see about that anyway. So let's start with, Donald Trump now owns a bank, kind of, I guess, right? On August 14th, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, OCC, gave preliminary conditional approval for a new entity called World Liberty Trust Company to operate as a national trust bank. What that means is that this bank can now issue, hold reserves for, and provide custody for USD1, that's World Liberty's dollar-backed stablecoin, under federal banking supervision. Now, at present, World Liberty uses outside firms to do that, and this charter lets it bring this operation in-house. And so what that means is World Liberty Trust is not a traditional bank. It can't take deposits. It can't lend money. The only reason, in fact, there is such a thing as an OCC-approved trust bank is the Genius Act, which was signed into law by President Trump last summer. That requires federal oversight for stablecoin issuers that have more than $10 billion in issuance and allows those that have less than that, like World Liberty Trust, to go with either federal or state supervision. Now, more broadly, crypto has been good to the Trump family. Trump personally reported around $1.4 billion in crypto income for 2025. That's the single largest source of income that year. It dwarfs his real estate income. Now, according to a Bloomberg analysis, that makes Trump the largest disclosed U.S. crypto moneymaker for all of 2025. Now, kind of adding a complication to this, the Crypto Regulating Clarity Act passed the House over a year ago, but it remains stuck in the Senate, partly on ethics language that's aimed squarely at President Trump's own crypto profits. Now, this is, of course, the first time, not surprisingly, a company owned by a sitting president's family has been granted bank status. But like I said, then again, Trump's financial background, unlike that of any other modern president. So what I thought we could do is kind of approach this in three parts. First, how big of a deal this whole Trump crypto thing is, then the OCC certification, if that was on the up and up, and then finally the Clarity Act piece of it. So again, starting off with how big of a deal are the Trump family's crypto ventures? Justin, what do you think?
Jimmy Carter put his peanut farm in a trust. And, I think this mingling of business and regulation is really problematic. And this speaks to, I think, a long history of Trump, especially kind of the real estate stuff. This feels like an extension where you have these assets of sort of dubious value that are easy to sort of funnel money into. And it feels like really a backdoor or maybe a front door, sort of corruption. You have this sort of untraceable, hard to value sort of thing. And it just, gosh, if I were going to bribe somebody, this feels like a great way to do it, doesn't it? I think this is really problematic. And I was actually, dead serious with the, this broader problem. We don't expect presidents to be involved in a bunch of business stuff that they are regulating. And I think this crypto, is especially problematic because sort of the whole point of it largely is to be opaque, for those that are, or at least there is of those who are crypto enthusiasts. One of the motivations is that, hey, this is more private, it keeps people out of my business, et cetera. And I think just in general, the president being this major player in crypto, it just in general is problematic, but while regulating it is doubly so.
Yeah, I was thinking of the musical. I think I'm getting it right. Chicago. Trump. If Trump is good to Mama, Mama's going to be good to Trump, and certainly Trump has been very supportive after not being supportive to the crypto crowd, and he is reaping the benefits of that. And I just want to maybe use very briefly a hypothetical. And imagine, if you will, that AOC becomes president in 2029, and she owned $1 billion family solar business, and her administration loosened solar guidelines, passed major solar legislation, and then a federal regulator approved her family's new national solar financing institution. Republicans would lose their ass, right? And they'd have a good point. And I think that's the problem, as Justin was sort of talking about, is that, Jimmy Carter put his business in a trust. Most presidents had put their business in a blind trust. What has Trump done? He's turned, and I'm using air quotes, his business over to his kids, right? And therein lies the problem, is that in anything that Trump does, and think about the $1.776 billion slush fund that was going to be done, where Trump sues his own Justice Department, and then he wants to do a deal with his Justice Department to settle it. And it looks murky, it looks suspicious, because it is.
I hear what you guys are saying, and I'm sympathetic, but
Mike, the defender of Trump, here we go.
Well, no, there's something in me that just almost constitutionally makes it difficult for me to start from my conclusion about Trump and work backwards from that, even though, as you guys have pointed out, he has given me plenty of reason to do that. So I guess this is what I'll say. Of course, we're right. I mean, you're right factually saying every president for really the last half century has put their finances into a blind trust except Donald Trump. That's true. But Trump's explanation isn't a crazy one. I don't think it was attorney's explanation. He owns a lot of highly visible self-branded assets. A couple weeks ago, I spent the week in Chicago. And if you ever spend any time in downtown Chicago, you are almost assaulted by that Trump building right there with the Trump letters that are, Christ, I don't know. They seem stories
Didn't
high.
they bulldoze the Sun-Times building to build that?
They're very intimidating, I got to say. But of course, there's a conflict of interest issue here. I mean, the president's family is the largest owner of a company regulated by a federal agency he controls. But number one, I'll say there's nothing actually illegal here, right? Because the federal law that bars government officials or government employees from participating in anything that affects their immediate family or their financial interest, there was an express exclusion for the president and vice president. The argument for that is that, well, their duties, their areas of responsibility are so broad that it wouldn't be practical for them to recuse themselves from anything that might affect them financially. And so Donald Trump, as I pointed out, is different. He has vast financial holdings, far bigger and more, different in a lot of ways from any previous president. And so, while he has certainly shown signs that he's a fan of self-dealing, and maybe that's going on here, I just could be, but I don't see show me the evidence,
Mike, shown signs of self-dealing?
Well,
there's just signs.
Yes.
It's not, come on.
Well, let me say this as well. When we take a look at the chartering process, a lot of folks are saying, oh, I don't know, this just seems kind of shady. Of course, they were going to approve, right, Trump's bank, essentially. Now, but that review took 221 days. That's nearly double the 120 days that the comptroller, Jonathan Gold, says that's the target time for review. So it took considerably longer. So maybe that means it wasn't pro forma. That's evidence that could possibly cut the other way. Also, by the way, there were two similar approvals that OCC gave this year to stablecoin places Coinbase and Circle. Circle's review took 165 days. Coinbase's took 180, both a lot less than World Liberty Trust, and both of them are far larger companies than World Liberty. To give you a sense, World Liberty has around $4 billion in their USD1 coin, compared to $73.3 billion for Circle and $245.9 billion for Coinbase. I'm not saying that means that the fix wasn't in. I'm just saying there's evidence evidence that maybe cuts the other way as well. And so
No,
I'm not convinced at this
so,
point.
so I think you misunderstood. So I want to
Oh,
backtrack
sorry.
for a second, because the strongest progressive argument to me is not the OCC never would have approved this for anyone else. The evidence doesn't support that. There are a number, as you pointed out, of comparable crypto trust bank approvals. The stronger argument that I was trying to make, and probably mix the apples and oranges together, is that we have an ethics system where a president can own a huge stake in an industry, profit enormously from it, shape the laws governing it, appoint the regulators overseeing it, and then have the regulators approve his family's financial institution. This may have been approved anyway. And the issue to me isn't about crypto and this particular approval per se. It's more about that merger of public power and private wealth.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair point. Now, I'll also even add to that by saying that even if the initial OCC review was nonpartisan and just done by career staff, as OCC says, we don't know anything about what interplay there was between OCC staff and Trump political appointees. And we also, maybe the review took longer because the career staff pushed back and said, this looks a little shady. We don't know. We also don't know going forward if regulators will feel comfortable bringing up issues given President Trump's penchant for calling out, some might even say, trying to wreak vengeance, indict folks who get in his way. So, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying, is that there are certainly red flags here. And the biggest one, I think, is the one you point out, Michael, that there's just an inherent conflict when you have the president owning an agency or a company that's being regulated by an agency he controls, especially in a presidency that believes very fervently in the unitary executive theory.
And I agree with Michael. I think I was also sort of conflating things a little bit, but I think on some level, some regulation is long overdue, as far as crypto goes, although that again kind of undercuts some of the ethos of it. But I think my broader problems with Trump and crypto are things like, him offering his own stable coin that turned out to not be stable. It's a great way to sort of funnel in corrupt money and fleece people that own red hats. And I think that, frankly, is more concerning to me in some ways than the regulatory thing. I think that this regulatory agency, in as much as I don't trust much that he does, I don't particularly trust this either. But frankly, I worry more about the way that sort of his crypto fortunes have enabled sort of a whole nother level of corruption than was there before.
Well, and the trajectory is interesting, right? Because until recently, Trump had actually been critical of crypto. In 2019, he called it not money, highly volatile, based on thin air. And in 2021, he told Fox Business that Bitcoin just seems like a scam. But then in the summer of 2024, he meets with crypto industry figures, he starts accepting crypto donations to his campaign, and he changes his tune. And at this point now, somewhere between 1/5 to 3/4 of his family's fortune is either crypto or crypto adjacent. So he has a pretty strong interest in promoting crypto. Now, I am guessing, even more than guessing, I think probably what folks would say is what President Trump was talking about was those very volatile, non-stable coins like Bitcoin, where they're not a good store of value. That's the whole point of having stable coins, having them pegged to something that won't be so incredibly volatile. So, yes, he can still be right about those previous things, but maybe he just, as AOC said, well, don't listen to our positions now. What are we saying now, right? Because crypto 1.0 was crazy. I don't know. Anyway.
I am still, I will say, as not an expert on crypto by any means. And as we were talking about before, I did lose.
You're not our senior crypto expert?
No, I lost a solid $12 on Bitcoin and Ethereum, although I wish I'd held the Bitcoin now that I had, that has, doubled from where I sold it, I think. But I have never been able to get my head around what the purpose of any of this is, whether it is kind of the traditional stuff like the Bitcoins and the Ethereums and some of those, or some of these new stable coins. It's just, the whole premise is just sort of bizarre. I mean, we have currency backed by the federal government already, and that seems to facilitate a lot of commerce. And I actually, God forbid I agree with Donald Trump, 1 point. But yeah, I mean, you have this thing that it's too volatile to really be useful as a currency. One of my favorites, there was a journalist who bought pizza with a Bitcoin early on. And, it was like a $1.4 million mistake or something like that. He paid, 15 Bitcoins for a pizza, back, 12 years ago or whatever. But I don't really I guess this gets to a broader concern that I have, which is all of these sort of exotic financial instruments. It feels like, the credit default swaps from, 20 years ago and things like that. I mean, we have all of this weird monetized stuff that is people are investing in, people with more money than me and whatnot. But I have yet to see sort of an affirmative case for what problem any of these things solve.
I'll make it.
And I appreciate that, because that was, I guess, where I was going is I'd like to know more about that, because I have not seen a particularly good affirmative case. But it does, just given the propensity for exotic financial instruments to crash our economy, on sort of 10-year cycles or so, it gives me pause. But Mike, I'd love to hear sort of what is the point of all of this?
We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys, or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,